Hello and welcome to Chapter 10, Infectious Disease. Diseases are caused by organisms called pathogens, and they are communicable, meaning they can be passed from person to person. They involve a carrier, which is the person that has the active pathogen, but lacks symptoms. Transmission is an element, so this is the mechanism of spreading disease. And then often, but not all the time, there is a vector involved, which are organisms that act as a carrier of the disease. Okay, so just to get some vocabulary out of the way, epidemic is a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time. A pandemic is prevalent over a whole country or the world. And then endemic is when something is regularly found among particularly people or in a certain area. So it's chronic in that area. Okay, so let's talk about a few diseases. So first we're going to talk about cholera. Cholera is caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae, and its transmission is waterborne. It occurs where people do not have access to proper food and water treatment. And the site of action is in the small intestine. So this is where they secrete which the protein cholarin that disrupts the epithelial lining, causing severe diarrhea. And cholera often causes death by dehydration. So to treat cholera, an IV with salt and glucose is used to rehydrate the body, and this person is just kept hydrated while they're still continue to be sick. And then you can also have oral rehydration through a glucose solution. Okay, so preventing cholera. Clean water and sewage is the best way to prevent cholera. Almost unknown in the developed world due to raw sewage treatment and clean water pipes. But cholera outbursts are common following natural disasters like in Haiti in 2010. Okay, strains of cholera. So until the 90s, only strain 1 was known. Several 20th century cholera pandemics began in Southeast Asia, and they were all the 01 strain. So the total cholera pandemics have been 7. And they quickly spread throughout the world due to sewage dumping and traveling, and then also in the accumulation in shellfish. So now there is a newer strain, 0139, which was first seen in October 1992, and it's much more virulent, and it's becoming the 8th pandemic. Okay, malaria. Malaria is caused by the Protus plasmodium, and there are 4 known species. It's passed through vectors, mosquitoes, and blood transfusions. It can pass through the placenta from the mother to the fetus. Mortality is high during the first 5 years of infection. Most of the time you die from flu-like symptoms. People are continually reinfected, are immune to further infections. And endemics occur during mosquito breeding cycles, so usually during rainy seasons. And to prevent malaria. So the number one way people have gone about preventing malaria has been through the reduction of mosquitoes. So this stops the transmission cycle by destroying mosquito eggs, and in stock areas of water with fish that eat mosquito larvae. So another way is to avoid being bitten by mosquitoes. So if you're going to be in an area where malaria is present, the use of sleeping nets, protective clothes, and repellent. And also you can use drugs to prevent the parasite from infecting people. I often, when I travel, take an anti-malarial drug. It's just not the best because it often makes you it makes you have really crazy dreams. It makes you really tired. It can make you really emotional. There's a lot of side effects to them, but the side effects are still preferable to malaria, right? Okay, so treating malaria. Anti-malarial drugs, they're taken before, during, and after visiting an area where malaria is endemic. And remember, endemic is where it is consistently, okay? Inhibit protein synthesis in the parasite. But resistance to some of these drugs has become widespread in Africa, South America, and New Guinea. And again, these are places where malaria is endemic. It's often misdiagnosed in developed countries as flu by doctors who are unfamiliar with malaria. but it's common with settled immigrants who visit family in malaria endemic areas. Okay, so worldwide control of malaria. The WHO tried eradicating malaria in the 50s. It was generally successful, but not 100%, because Plasmodium became resistant to the drugs. Mosquitoes became resistant to DDT and other insecticides. And also the program was expensive and unpopular because people lost their immunity when malaria came back. So, okay, and so there has been a steady increase in resistant Plasmodium. There's also been an increase in species that cause severe malaria. And there has been difficulties in vaccine development, but there is an increase in the number of epidemics and increase of migration of people from endemic areas. And so I think that more money has been or will be put into vaccine development for malaria, especially as our climate continues to warm. Okay, 40% of the world population lives in endemic malaria regions, and improvements in control methods would include the use of modern techniques like gene sequencing, development of new vaccines, and renewed international will to remove malaria. And again, as malaria as people all over the world really fought malaria, and then in the 50s when some of those programs became kind of unpopular, a lot of the places that still suffer from malaria are in developing countries, equatorial developing countries. And a lot of people sort of lost interest in fighting the disease. But again, as our world is changing, and I think as our world starts warming up quite a bit, malaria is going to start spreading. That's some of the work that I looked at, the spread of malaria and West Nile virus, that have spread out of their historic ranges. They've gone further north than they've ever been seen before. So as that continues to happen, I imagine people will start funding more malaria research. Okay, so moving on to AIDS, which is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. This is caused by HIV, which is the human immunodeficiency virus. HIV is a retrovirus, meaning its genetic material is RNA, not DNA. It uses our cells to convert its RNA into DNA. It infects and destroys cells of the immune system, allowing for opportunistic infections of other pathogens. And all of this collected is what is referred to as AIDS. So it is spread through direct exchange of body fluid, so through sexual intercourse, blood donation, the sharing of needles by drug users, through placenta, okay, and the mixing of blood during birth, not spit or sweat. The initial epidemic in North America and Europe discovered in the 80s amongst male homosexuals. It is now a very serious pandemic with over 25 million people having died from AIDS in 2010, up to that statistic was taken in 2010. Okay, so HIV is a slow virus. It takes several years to develop AIDS symptoms. And you don't die directly from HIV, but you die from the opportunistic infections that you get from having a compromised immune system from HIV. So something like pneumonia or cancer or brain disease. And there's no cure for AIDS or vaccine for HIV. Some people display natural immunity. Like they might show HIV positive but never develop AIDS. And there are quite a lot of drug therapies that are antiretrovirals, which severely slows down the progression of AIDS. There are several medications used in combination to increase the efficacy. And so this one, zidovudine, is similar to nucleotide thymine, and it binds to the viral enzymes to stop the replication. And new therapies are always being developed for HIV and AIDS, and people can live relatively normal lives as long as they continue to take medication. Okay, it's hard to prevent HIV only because it's difficult to control. The virus changes its surface proteins quickly, so vaccines are nearly impossible to develop at this point. Public health measures to prevent HIV are the leading way to stop it. So this is encouraging the use of condoms, right? Barrier protection during intercourse. And this is estimated to be largely responsible for the 25% decrease in HIV infections that was seen between 2001 and 2009. And also IV user education, as well as free needles for drug users. Okay, also to contract tracing, so tracking transmission of HIV, getting tested and informing your partners. Needle exchange schemes. Blood donations are screened for HIV. HIV testing is not expensive, but governments are reluctant to widespread testing because of infringement of personal freedom. But it is highly suggested for people in high-risk groups. So this is like drug users, etc. Okay, moving on to tuberculosis or TB. This is caused by two bacteria, Mycobacterium tuberculosis and Mycobacterium bovis. Pathogens live inside human cells, particularly in the lungs. This can develop quickly, or it can remain dormant for years. Inactive carriers cannot spread infection, but bacteria can later become active, especially if that person becomes weakened from things like malnourishment or other diseases or HIV. Usually it's a opportunistic infection to strike people who have HIV, and TB is the leading cause of death for HIV positive people. So TB is carried in the air through drops of liquid, like coughs or sneeze. The transmission occurs when people inhale those droplets. M. bovis passed from cattle meat and milk, although this transmission is now extremely rare in developed countries. Okay, recent increase in TB cases are due to a strain becoming antibiotic resistant, to the HIV and AIDS pandemic, poor housing in inner cities and homelessness, as well as a breakdown of TB control programs. Okay, so to treat TB, a sample of mucus from the lungs easily identifies tuberculosis. And if it's positive, the infected person has to be isolated ASAP and treated with a pretty strong antibiotic regimen. And it's pretty long at 6 to 9 months. So people who don't complete the treatment may facilitate drug-resistant TB bacteria. So as always, when you go into an antibiotic treatment, it's very important to finish it. Multiple drug-resistant forms of TB exist, and they are resistant to at least 2 main drugs used to treat it. So with this, it can take 2 years to treat. Okay, so preventing the spread would be to avoid contacting people that have it. Also, the BCG vaccine protects against M. bovis strain of TB, but the effectiveness decreases with age. Cattle are routinely tested for TB and killed if positive, and the TB bacteria is killed when milk is pasteurized. So antibiotics can be used to treat or cure bacterial or fungal infections. They show selective toxicity, killing the pathogen, but no effect on host cells. And they can be derived from living organisms or man-made. How they work. So they stop the synthesis of bacterial walls. Essentially, they're stopping protein synthesis. They interfere with cell membrane function, and they stop enzyme action. They are not effective on viruses. Okay, so you can't take them for most colds and flu. They don't do anything. There's a broad spectrum effective against a wide range of bacteria, and a narrow spectrum effective against only a few. Okay, so that's it. So I encourage you to really go through your chapter and look at the different statistics that they give you about these diseases, especially the pop-out boxes where they give you specific information about diseases and how different countries have handled dealing with them over time. And I'll see you in the next lecture.